You ever think you're working too hard? Well, it might be true. We're talking about America's overwork ethic on today's BFD. America. When it comes to the developed world, we're #1 in everything, including the amount of hours we work, sadly. More than the Irish, more than the Germans, and yes, even more than the Japanese, who have one of the highest suicide rates around, by the way. Probably because of this commute, but anyway, we're #1. Yay! So, you think I'm going to say that that's a bad thing, that we're working ourselves to an early grave, that our quality of life is going down the tubes, blah, blah, blah. Well, you're right. That is true. However, is there good with the bad? Here to help me figure it all out are TakePart.com's social justice editor, Allan MacDonell, and historian Thaddeus Russell. Thanks so much for being here, guys.
Thank you.
So first off, is this an actual problem? Are Americans actually overworked?
Sure. I mean, we're losing our weekend, we're losing our freedom, we're losing our leisure time. There's an increase in the number of hours Americans are working. People are living to work and working to live.
People aren't having time to rejuvenate, that you don't have time to come back fresh. And if you put it in the global perspective, like there's no other developed country in the world who works like we do.
That's right, not even close. Puritans brought this idea that work in itself is godly and virtuous, no matter what you get for it. The Puritans, now, I mean, some people might consider them to be, you know, wonderful, virtuous people.
Or freaks.
Or the most ridiculous people in human history. Now, they certainly established the core values in our culture. The Puritan work ethic is at the very center of that, again, which is that you work to please God or to be a good person, not to get something for it. It's an end in itself, not a means to an end.
But also the 40-hour work week was pretty well established. I think back like 1914, I read, like Henry Ford decided, I do better with my workers working five days a week, 8 hours a day. I give them 2 days off, and I get much more out of them than if I work 9 hours or 10 hours.
So what are you arguing then? That people should just, you know, walk off of the assembly line, walk out of their offices, take more naps? I mean, what
yes.
is this?
No, so what, yes. So that's exactly what's been happening in this place called Europe, an exotic, strange land. Yes. So what happened is that the Puritanism did not sink nearly as deeply in Europe. So they simply don't have this idea nearly as powerfully as we do that work in itself is virtuous. So what they did was they started to withdraw their labor. They didn't volunteer to do extra work like Americans often do, right? I'll stay as late as you want, boss, because it's a good thing to do. And so what employers have had to do in response to that, anytime labor is withdrawn, as Henry Ford did, is to replace it with what? Innovation and technology. So that's why the assembly line was invented. That is why the fax machine was invented. There was a postal strike in Great Britain that caused, it wasn't invented, but it became a common feature of the workplace because of that postal strike. So when you withdraw labor and there's no one to replace, there are no sort of Puritan workers to replace the slackers, right? Employers must replace that work, not with new workers, but with technology or innovation.
Also, like, just to get back to the original question, not everybody believes it's a good thing. A lot of workers don't believe it's a good thing. Right. A lot of people going through their lives, they realize that this is not the way to go. Like, there are studies of people, like, as they're dying, they ask them, what are your biggest regrets? And they say, I wish I hadn't worked so much. I mean, it's kind of like an accepted kind of wisdom. Like, people know this in their core, that if I work too much, I'm missing out on my life.
When Americans get technology like this, which has roughly the power of a steel mill in Pittsburgh in the 19th century, they say, oh, this is not a labor-saving device. This is a labor-increasing device. Now I can work all the time on the elevator, walking down the street, in my car, on the airplane.
Right. So in that same sense, though, is there a generational shift going on? Because I feel like among millennials or younger people, there is a focus away from work, or is it that there's just a blurred line between work and play because of things like this?
I hope so. I mean, so there is, as we speak, a strike, or actually probably hundreds, probably thousands of strikes as we speak right now in American workplaces. That is people surfing the web when they're at work.
Right.
How do we know this? Because capitalists have invested millions and millions and millions of dollars studying the problem and trying to figure out how to fix it.
But there's no way to fix it, right? Because the permeability of whatever social networking and the internet and the connectivity of the world that is you can't close that off from people's workplaces nowadays, right?
Well, they figure out ways to block certain websites, but sure, it will always be
you got
the
it on your
case.
phone. They can't block the website on your phone.
Right. There's only so much they can do. So there is this tension between the little Cotton Mather inside of us and the little hedonist inside of us all the time, and that's sort of this unresolved conflict among Americans.
Some of that might come too also from when you're kind of pressured to work more than 8 hours. Like you're going to take your breaks. You're going to take them any way you can get them, and if you can get them by getting on the internet and surfing the internet, then that's what you're going to do. But there's all this research that if you work more than 8 hours a day, you're way less productive. Like if you work 10 hours, those 2 extra hours don't get you 40% or whatever many percent more production. It's very diminished, the kind of production you get.
Let's get back to some the questions of why it is sort of culturally verboten to discuss this kind of stuff at large or in the workplace.
I'll tell you why in the workplace. Because in the workplace, there's a management thing in so many companies that is completely against the idea that you should have an 8-hour day. It's very widespread right now, especially in the knowledge kind of workplaces, where you should have a passion. You should want to be here 10 hours a day. You should, and if they ask you to be here for 12 hours a day, like maybe for a 2-week burst, you should welcome that as well, just to show that you're impassioned. And there's a lot of people, people are afraid of, you talk about the millennials. The millennials are having a hard time getting jobs they want. So if they get a job they want, they're kind of afraid that they may not be able to get another one. So there's a lot of insecurity. I think you play on people's insecurity, you can get them to commit to all sorts of things that they wouldn't if they didn't have to feel like they could potentially lose something that's valuable to them.
Well, that's the thing too, is that's a sentiment, right? You're saying millennials, they're struggling to find the jobs they want, and then when they do, they're told, well, you're lucky to have this job, especially in a time of high unemployment, and so you should just, thank your lucky stars that you're here, and so the notion of talking about that is crazy.
But it's not just millennials either, because previous generations would look at their parents, and their parents like devoting their entire lives to work, and at that age, you were looking, you'd say, I have a different value system. I have a different kind of idea of what I want out of my life as I'm going into this, and I don't want to, waste myself at some task that really means nothing to me. And so there's a lot of sense that if you're being asked to work longer, it's going to show some kind of virtue that you're this person who will work longer. But then there's other people questioning it all the time.
Now, I'm sure a lot of people who are watching are thinking, well, if we start working less, we're going to end up like the Europeans. We're going to be less productive, we're going to be impoverished in some ways. And I say, yeah, you're right. The last time I checked, the French are living in mud huts. No, as a matter of fact, their productivity per worker is higher than ours. As a matter of fact, of course, they have essentially the same material lifestyle that we do, and they work hundreds of hours less than we do.
I think in Germany they have 6 weeks a year of vacation, and no one's going to say the Germans are lagging behind in productivity or work ethic.
In fact, last time I checked, their economy was far better than ours. The fewer the work hours, the lower we reduce the work day, the more unemployment will be solved, right? So actually there was basically a forgotten movement among union leaders in the 1940s and 1950s to reduce the work week, and part of their argument was that it would reduce unemployment because it would force employers to hire more people to replace that work that had been taken away. That's been lost. That's a movement I would love to see reemerge in this country. It could be the case that I know that many American workers really do love to work. They really want. I can't say to them that they're wrong or evil for wanting that, but we might start pointing out what they're losing. It's a cost-benefit analysis, I mean, if you really want to spend your life at work, being a worker, there's nothing I can say to you. I think that, however, as we were saying earlier, that most Americans are quite conflicted about this, that there's a great desire among them for more leisure time, more freedom. And so if you start to appeal to that desire that's clearly in most of them, and offer what could be a potentially different world, living more like Europeans, or even better than that. That's not the end. Europeans can work fewer hours as well. I think you can start to see a change in mind across the population that will force employers to reduce hours because they will not have anyone to replace those workers with.
Also, when you talk about leisure time, it seems like it's leisure time. It seems like it's like an elective or some kind of luxury to have leisure time.
Like they were going to be playing volleyball or something.
But it's completely necessary. It's a necessary time that's not that people don't have. It's like time to actually take care of things that you need to take care of, like family relationships, like anything that you need to have a full rounded life. where you can have some kind of satisfaction from it.
I don't want to denigrate doing nothing or doing things like playing volleyball, because actually that's part of the Puritan ethic, right? If we start to have to make excuses about what we do with our free time, then actually we are buying into the Puritan work ethic. We're accommodating it. I want to say there's absolutely nothing wrong with sitting still and doing nothing, or looking at pornography on the web, for God's sake, right? Or drinking, or lying in bed, right? I mean, those are the things we need to defend if we're going to change the culture.
What about the scientist or the engineer, the inventor toiling away endlessly to try to come up with the greatest next innovation? So
if you have a personality type where that's what you're like, if you're just driven to work like that, there's no reason to stop that person. It's not like you have to tell a scientist you can't do that. On the other hand, you don't want to impose that on the majority of people.
Well, the question is people who volunteer to work at things they wouldn't do otherwise, right? That's how I define work. It's something you wouldn't do otherwise unless you were coerced into it, right? So if scientists are working on their own to invent something, right, because they love doing it, that's not really the problem. The problem is when the boss says to you, gee, I could really use an extra 4 hours of your time tonight, even though you're not going to get paid for it. People say, sure, boss, I'll do it, right?
What are some ways that people can self-police when they think that they're potentially overworking?
That's tough. It's really tough, because if it's the kind of environment where people are being laid off who aren't performing in that way, I mean, it's a tough decision.
Well, here's one thing we can do. We can stop shaming people for not working or not wanting to work. There's a tremendous amount of shame in this country that's directed at people who are considered to be slackers, right? Who are lazy, who don't want to work hard. When we stop shaming people, we will change this culture, we will change the world, we will live better lives, I believe. We will have more time.
Thank you guys so much for your time. I think I'm gonna go and not work anymore today.
Good man.
Americans are hard workers. It's who we are. Yeah, it may well be driving us to a wide range of physical and mental ailments like never before, but it is also driving, and always has driven us, to new horizons and fantastic innovations. But this good doesn't simply come from long hours with no reason. And in this economy, the potential to push employees too hard because they can't say no is always there. Let's not forget that if our American work ethic is something worth bragging about, then those human resources should be valued and not discounted. Tell us what you think about the issue of work by leaving a comment below. And while you're there, click the link to take action. For BFD, I'm David Park. Don't forget to subscribe.